Part 4, The Spell, Mind Control. There are specific strategies and time-tested science dedicated to both the controlling of the masses and the direct control over a single individual. In this presentation, we will explore methodologies of mind control and what to do about them so that we can see through the illusions and find the truth, or, as Max Hendel put it, the light of wisdom. In the last presentation, we discussed the idea that there is hidden knowledge, and because important information has been withheld for so long from the average human, we now have a crisis of perception. We also explored the idea of thinking about all life as an organism or living thing that already exists as a whole with natural law binding it together. Man's artificial attempts to recreate a false sense of security and control only leads to harm. As we get deeper into this series now, things are going to get much more difficult. Let's start with Hermetic principles. Now, Hermetic principles were not taught in traditional school, and that's why they're called esoteric or occulted information. Only familiar to those who look into the ancient teachings or the mystery schools. Upon careful examination of each principle, it's hard to find an argument that these principles are not in effect. Number one, mentalism, is to say that there is an underlying intelligence in the all, or the great intelligence, as we discussed previously. Correspondence is the idea as above, so below. You see this reflection in all things. Vibration is very much in line with modern science and quantum physics. Everything is vibration. Number 4 is polarity. Just like a magnet has two opposite ends, or the planet, everything has a polarity. Number 5, rhythm, like the waves of the ocean, or our breathing, or the seasons. Everything has its rhythm, up and down. Number 6, cause and effect. Every action has a reaction. We can test this with anything. And gender. Everything in nature, there's gender. It exists in all things. This is a foundational concept. Both the Hermetic principles and the idea of natural law are both two bodies of thought and knowledge entirely misunderstood or never even heard of. Once I've had time to mentally digest these concepts, the more time I think about it, the more they resonate. From the moment I looked at this list, I could find no disagreement to the validity of what is being represented. From the book, The End of All Evil. Principles. An example of principle can be found in thermodynamics. A liquid is cooler than a gas. This is a principle. Because this is a principle, it does not restrict us, but enables us. Using this principle, we can condense and expand a substance between gas and liquid to create refrigeration. With this principle, we have more understanding and more power. Principles are truths that create freedom. Conscience. From Latin, con means together, and sciere means to know. Put those together and you get to know together. To know together, or common sense. Knowing is a science involving theories, testing theories, inductive and deductive reasoning, the trivium, discourse, then of course combining all that with intuition and gut feelings. We find truth best working together, with many minds are better than one, and when those minds are in agreement with common principles. Where's the enthusiasm to study the truth of things? It is an exciting process, the discovery of reality. Truth is knowable, discoverable, and objective. A great gift of the universe. Hypnosis. There are two main branches of hypnosis: hypnotherapy and hypnotic suggestion. Hypnosis, also referred to as hypnotherapy or hypnotic suggestion, is a trance-like state in which you have heightened focus and concentration. Hypnosis is usually done with the help of a therapist using verbal repetition and mental images. When you're under hypnosis, you usually feel calm and relaxed and are more open to suggestions. We've all heard of hypnosis. Maybe you know somebody that used hypnotism to quit smoking cigarettes. Or maybe you saw a hypnotist at a fair. The reason I bring this point up is to emphasize that the science of hypnosis involves aiding a person in reaching a heightened state of focus. When one is exceptionally focused on one thing, we can miss a whole world of events. This is how magic works. By keeping your attention focused at what the left hand is doing, while the right hand is doing something tricky. Most people, myself included, want to get home from work so they can check out. Been focusing real hard all day on something that is not necessarily enjoyable or desirable. Consider driving to work and blanking out on the whole trip, or starting to drive to work out of routine when meaning to head somewhere else. Trance-like state, anyone? How about the state of mind we're in when we're watching TV or movie? Open to suggestions? There's a good reason companies spend so much money on advertising. It's a focused attention, a heightened focus, achieved through verbal repetition and mental images. How often do we spend our lives in some trance or another? Are we not susceptible to hypnosis in our daily lives? In the everyday trance of a daydream or movie, an imaginary world seems somewhat real to you in the sense that it fully engages your emotions. Imaginary events can cause real fear, sadness, or happiness, and you may even jolt in your seat if you're surprised by something, a monster leaping from the shadows, for example. Some researchers categorize all such trances as forms of self-hypnosis. The body and the mind both have a default program to find safety and comfort, it seems. In stressful times, people wish for things to be normal again. I began to notice in my thought process times where my feelings would blur with something I had seen the night before on a violent TV show. That made me want to stop watching television the more I became aware of the phenomenon. I wonder if the subconscious mind can differentiate from TV reality and real life. Perhaps our subconscious mind lives out trauma from television, which actually affects our emotions and dealings with other humans, our friends, and family. In the sci-fi movie dark city, John Murdoch is trying to figure out why everyone keeps falling asleep and why it's dark all the time.
In a city on the edge of darkness.
What is happening here? Why is everyone asleep?
On a night that never ends.
Asleep now. Who are they?
John Murdoch's search for a past
They set you up with a fake identity.
will lead to a future
You are the subject of their experiment.
beyond all imagination.
We all are.
It's a pretty scary flick, but it paints quite a picture, especially the imagery at the very end, where it shows the whole thing takes place on this slice of a planet that is an island unto itself, completely separated from all else. No escape, a prison planet situation. In so many ways, this represents my fear of what is actually happening all around us, in slow, subtle, less dramatic way. People are more and more hypnotized, focused states that are self-imposed, almost as if we're all floating around in our own little dark cities. Being in this programmable state, we become vulnerable to mind control methodologies. Mind control, though it sounds nefarious, is actually a good thing if it's practiced responsibly. To control one's own mind is the most responsible and admirable thing a person can do, as long as it's done for improvement rather than dampening of life's natural desire to grow. Neuro-linguistic programming, or NLP, is used by many people to better themselves and overcome life's obstacles and problems. Quitting smoking or overcoming a fear, just like hypnosis. What is troubling is understanding that there are controlling, power-hungry people in this world that understand these deep principles at a very young age. On this slide, I show just a very few of the methodologies that would be used in neuro-linguistic programming. There are many more. One is paying close attention to the person. The specialists pay close attention to the cues of a person, like the movements of the eyes, pupil dilation, nervous tics, body flesh, body language, breathing pattern. They can infer the state of mind of a person because the instant emotion of a person is the association of such cues. Number 2, speaking with a suggestive frequency of the human mind. Delivering the words close to the beats of the human heart could induce the higher state of suggestibility in the mind. Number 3, bypassing the conscious mind by voice roll. This technique is the process of the voice roll, a patterned pace style that entrenches the desired point, thus bypassing the conscious mind to the subconscious mind of the person. There's simply no polite way to tell people they've dedicated their lives to an illusion. Daniel Dennett. It's extremely humiliating to realize that you've been tricked. In many cases, folks are so invested in their career or life's work that they lose the ability to see truth from a truly objective point of view. Life will offer daily opportunities, even for the wisest and smartest of us, to realize that we are wrong. Mistakes are part of the process. As we grow wiser, we become more aware that there is just so much in this existence that we will never know it all, and there are too many doors of knowledge to open them all. So why is it so hard to share information regarding a conspiratorial or skeptical point of view regarding the current state of affairs in world or government politics or world events? Often, when I share some alternative information, for instance, that Building 7 was never hit by a plane and fell at free fall speed, even if the person has never heard that before, the tendency is to avoid the conversation or end it as abruptly as possible. It feels uncomfortable. What I notice happening more often than not is the new idea presented does not jive or match with a person's worldview. and they tend to reject the new idea without any examination of whether it's a fact, as if it were a contagious element set to destroy their brain from the inside. Why are most people so unconscious that they continue to refuse to live in harmony with natural law, fail to recognize the rampant presence of evil in their midst, willfully participate in such evil, either directly or indirectly? And the picture there shows what looks like people might as well be waiting at the DMV, just waiting to do what they're told, not really taking their own action, willful decisions. On the right, you see the tree of life, and all the things that cut up the tree of life, that sever the roots and cut off the branches and the leaves. Willful ignorance, fear of owning personal responsibility, self-loathing due to lack of self-respect. The sad truth is that too many of us are spending too much of our time in the realm of evil thoughts and deeds. The results are plainly evident. Humans are facing every kind of imaginable horror on this planet, from war to starvation to mental illness. We accept this condition because we are unaware that all of our actions and deeds are creating the reality in which all humans are experiencing. It's like a family that lives in a messy house, and they all expect someone else to clean up the mess. They go on living like this until one of the people dies of sickness related to the unsanitary conditions. Whose fault was it for the death? The person should have left the messy house, right? The trouble is, in this analogy, the house is our planet, and the family is the human race. And although our imagination would love to leave the dirty planet, like in the movie WALL-E, we're stuck here in our own mess. But if we make a strong effort, each of us, to improve and understand the real situation here, it can be changed. We must become conscious of ourselves and our communities. This will take initiative, hard work, and effort on a few people at first to motivate the others. In part 3, we discussed the interconnectedness of all life on this planet. What has been occurring in recent years is a ramping up of the fragmentation process. The more humans are focused on mundane tasks, the less they are noticing the inner workings of those who seek control. Power itself needs fragmentation in order to gain more power. Hierarchies consist of each layer below being broken down into smaller parts that can be managed. It's really difficult to think big and see all life as a system if you have always been looking at it from the point of view of one puzzle piece, as in the slide. It's broken from the whole. Another example of this concept we can use is from the movie Finding Nemo.
Referee, don't carry a crown, would you please? And we need a few more buttons. Hello, little fella. Beauty, isn't he? I found that guy struggling for life out in the reef, and I saved him. So, that Novocaine kicked in yet?
He likes bubbles.
Bonjour.
What's interesting is the etymology for Nemo is Latin, literally, no man, no one, nobody. The other fish in the dentist's office, they grew up in tanks, fish tanks, from stores. They had no experience of the actual ocean. They only heard about it from others. So when Nemo shows up and tries to tell them about the ocean, he might as well be talking about a TV show from their point of view. Or maybe this guy's just nuts and he made up this whole ocean thing. So our current existence is like the tank that Nemo's in. The idea that we can change our behavior and in that process change the world is like the new fish, Nemo. Nemo's not a man. He's nobody. He represents man's thought. He's discovery, the new idea. Everyone listening is like the fish in the fishbowl who grew up in the fishbowl. It's hard to imagine an ocean that you've never been in. So a new idea in a similar way. So what I'm saying here is there a possible world with no evil in human interactions? Your mind will say, that's impossible, because our fishbowl has been diluted with evil as long as we've been swimming in it. I made my own list of methods of manipulation. These are things I think are used in war, in terms of strategies, and things I think are thought up behind the scenes in modern days. Play on people's fears. Poison the food supply. Poison the water supply. Divide and conquer. Indoctrination from an early age. Storytelling. Capture the imagination. Subversive symbolism. Poisonous medicine. Hegelian dialectic. Tar baby tactic. Encirclement. Emotional traumatic experiences. In all the history of humankind, all methods of coercion have been experimented with. The authorities and controlling forces of the world have achieved a long list of methods to control populations. To keep people in a state of fear and scarcity, a ruler warns constantly of an impending doom or a force which threatens us all, thereby requiring the raising of an army and, of course, more taxes. The food and water supply would have historically been an important part of any battle or war between peoples. In modern times, it does not take much research to find examples of food and water being altered or poisoned or neglected in some way to be harmful to humans. Divide and conquer is a method of keeping people distanced and fearful of each other. Flags, borders, and military salutes are great propagating the idea that there's lots of other groups to fear, so we must ourselves be totally brutal and deadly force. Still knowing that wouldn't that be the credo of the other army? Certain religions, historically, were much more forceful with their views. People were killed for heresy, or worse, tortured. In modern times, there's still much pressure to fit in and be like the others. This occurs in churches, schools, and jobs. There is an expectation of conformity. In NLP, the practitioner learns to tell a story to get the subject in an imaginative state so that the practitioner can drop little hints and repeat key words meant to instruct the tranced listener to follow specific embedded messages. Symbolism could be a whole series by itself. What is important to realize is that symbolism is a language of the universe. Certain archetypes exist that are understood on a subconscious level, even if they are not comprehended in logical thought on the surface. Though we certainly have learned a lot about medicine in the modern age, there's much harm being done. Over 300,000 deaths a year due to pharmaceuticals. Hegelian dialectic will be discussed in an upcoming slide. The tar baby idea is using a decoy to flush out all the resistance so they can be nullified. Encirclement is the ancient strategy of just completely surrounding the enemy in every way. Emotional traumatic experiences tend to fragment the mind, forcing people into one part of the mind that feels comfortable, effectively blocking the ability to be a free thinker and use the whole brain as a unit. We're all affected by this tactic in many ways, but I would like to mention here the unnoticed effect of killing humans on television and movies. How many people have you witnessed being murdered or killed in a given week? Just because it's on the screen does not mean that it does not affect your mind and anatomy in a traumatic way. A thing quoted to David Rockefeller. If the Council on Foreign Relations raises the hackles of the conspiracy theorists, the Bilderberg meetings must induce apocalyptic visions of omnipotent international bankers plotting with unscrupulous government officials to impose cunning schemes on an ignorant and unsuspecting world. David Rockefeller. Are there organizations in the world whose main goal is to subvert your attention and direct your mind to think a certain way? Is there a massive amount of time and energy being spent constantly on how to control the minds of the masses? Of course, that is for your safety, don't worry. If you haven't ever thought about systems dedicating to controlling your mind, consider looking into the Tavistock Institute, the Club of Rome, the Bilderberg Group, or the Council on Foreign Relations, just to name a few. There are numerous clubs and groups who all have the same goal: control the minds of the people. If they were having no success, these groups would cease to exist for lack of funding. Yet some have been around for a long time and seem to be growing in strength. It's really nothing new for people to try and take over as much of the world as possible. The past attempts usually used brutality and violence, which ultimately failed in each case. The modern tactic is a silent war, using information, toxins and poisons, and various mind control methodologies. Edward Bernays was known as the master of propaganda. He was known to say, "Propaganda is the executive arm of the invisible government." Edward Bernays brought cigarettes to America, convinced the world that smoking cigarettes was a great thing to do. He was also quoted as saying, "In almost every act of our daily lives, whether in the sphere of politics or business, in our social conduct or our ethical thinking, we are dominated by the relatively small group of persons, small number of persons. It is they who pull the wires which control the public mind." The massive amount of time, money, and energy spent by companies, think tanks, governments, and political groups is a tribute to the effectiveness of advertising and propaganda. There's a plaque above the lockers in my daughter's high school that says, "If you don't stand for something, you will fall for anything." The fact that you're watching this series and have made it this far shows that you are a human who is actively searching for truth and curious if you can make the world a better place. Remember how we discussed hypnotism really being a type of attentive focus? If our focus is not solely on good or life-giving activities, we tend to be victims of other more focused and attentive agendas designed to prey on our emotions in order to affect our actions. If we are not very aware, we can all become trapped in evil plots unknowingly because of our ignorance. I know this, unluckily, from my own experience. The 3 monkeys represent emotional mind control. When we're in a state of anger, sadness, frustration, because a conversation becomes uncomfortable, the tendency is to close our ears or our mind or our mouth. George Hegel was known to say, "We learn from history that we do not learn from history." The word dialectic means the art or practice of arriving at the truth by the exchange of logical arguments. Definition number 2. The process especially associated with Hegel of arriving at the truth by stating a thesis, developing a contradictory antithesis, and combining and resolving them into a coherent synthesis. The Marxian process of change through the conflict of opposing forces, whereby a given contradiction is characterized by a primary and a secondary aspect, the secondary succumbing to the primary, which is then transformed into an aspect of a new contradiction. A prominent philosopher named George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel has been seen in the 20th century as the originator of the thesis, antithesis, synthesis triad, or the Hegelian dialectic. The Hegelian dialectic is where the ruling elite create a problem, anticipating in advance the reaction of the population to the crisis, and thus conditioning the people to call for a change. When the population is properly conditioned, the desired agenda of the ruling elite is presented as the solution. The solution they present is not intended to solve the problem, but to serve as a basis for a new problem, or exacerbate the existing one. When the newly created problem reaches a boiling point, it becomes the foundation for the people to clamor for the change again. This process is repeated over and over, all the time moving society towards whatever endpoint they have in mind. Remember when we discussed the word dialectic? The art or practice arriving at the truth by the exchange of logical arguments? Here's an example of the Hegelian dialectic at play in the real world. I chose September 11th, building explosions, and demolition events. The problem: America is defenseless against these cave dwellers. Over 3,000 innocent Americans die because of terrorists. So-called terrorists. The reaction: Americans put flag stickers on their cars, and they fear people from the Middle East. Patriotism soars, and many Americans want revenge. The solution: the government expands mass surveillance to its own citizens openly and nullifies the Constitution with the Patriot Act. They begin a war, and the invasion of Iraq ensues. The shock and awe program keeps the people mesmerized and satiated. And the president's ratings went way up during that period of time. Most things in the network news cycle are some sort of Hegelian dialectic being played out. News is not actually an honest effort to keep you informed about things that are really going on, especially in your area. News is designed to make money by preying on your emotions and insecurities. News has no conscience, no heart, and no empathy. It's hard for me to understand how anyone trusts any news network after catching networks in such blatant lies in the past. If someone borrows money from me and doesn't ever pay back, I never lend that person money again. If someone lies to me, I lose respect for that person and do not trust them like I would someone who never lies. The news isn't even a person, and the news lies. But lies make money. The aim of End Evil is not to focus in on the most evil aspects of existence, but to understand the workings of evil and recognize evil for what it truly is. This is necessary because evil is tricky. Like the wolf in sheep's clothing, the trickster will always try to fool you. Becoming aware of trickery, in the language of trickery, in the science of mind control, will help us all to heal ourselves inwardly and separate from the cycle of emotional reaction and ignorance. We could grow accustomed to studying problems, working together to discuss opposing viewpoints, and discovering the common sense or conscience by mutual agreement, and working hard on localized creative solutions to problems as they begin to arise.
The buckled column caused additional collapsed floors and falling debris that removed support from adjacent interior columns. A chain reaction then caused other interior columns to fail in quick succession. The outside shell of the building fell. The NIST team found no evidence that explosives were involved in the collapse.
And our analysis showed that even the smallest explosive charge that was capable of bringing down the critical column in the building, had it occurred, we would have seen sound levels of 120 to 130 decibels about a half a mile away. That would have been an incredibly loud sound, and that sound was not picked up by any of the videos or witnesses that we have talked to.
The team found that World Trade Center 7's design was generally consistent with the relevant building codes when it was built.
Our high-rise buildings in this country are very, very safe. Having a collapse of this nature is a very rare event.
Nevertheless, to ensure that buildings do not collapse in fires, even when sprinklers fail or are not present, the NIST team urges reevaluation of the fire performance of structures with long-span floors and other design elements similar to WTC-7. The team's report also calls for stronger codes, standards, and practices so that other buildings don't suffer the same fate.
Tall building had ever collapsed primarily due to fire. But that's exactly what investigators believe happened to the 47-story World Trade Center Building 7 on September 11th.
Because everybody, once you have seen Building 7, there is no way back. You can cheat on yourself and you can try to suppress it, but you cannot. You have seen it and then there's no way back. It's not very healthy, to lie to yourself and say, no, I didn't see that. Yeah. But many people do, because it's simply too painful.
Now, more on the latest building collapse in New York. You might have heard a few moments ago I was talking about the Salomon Brothers building collapsing, and indeed it has. It seems that this was not a result of a new attack. It was because the building had been weakened during this morning's attacks. We'll probably find out more now about that from our correspondent Jane Stanley. Jane, what more can you tell us about the Salomon Brothers building and its collapse?
Well, only really what you already know. Details are very, very sketchy. As you can see behind me, the Trade Center appears to be still burning. We see these huge clouds of smoke and ash, and we know that behind that there's an empty piece of what was a very familiar New York skyline, a symbol of the financial prosperity of this city, but completely disappeared now, and New York is still unable to take on board what has happened to them today.
Presumably there were very few people in the Salomon building when it collapsed. I mean, there were, I suppose, fears of possible further collapses around the area.
That's what you would hope, because they don't really know where to turn. That's the very sad thing. I think there's going to be a lot of very, very traumatized people that has hit them very, very hard.
Jane, I think many of us, when we heard the news, perhaps on the radio earlier today, were completely flabbergasted by it and just couldn't comprehend it. I mean, it almost sounded too far-fetched. I was wondering what it's felt like for you being in Manhattan. Well, unfortunately, I think we've lost the line with Jane Stanley in Manhattan.
Now, here we're going to show you a videotape of the collapse itself. Describe that. Now we go to videotape, the collapse of this building. Amazing, incredible picture word.
Too far-fetched.
For the third time today, it's reminiscent of those pictures we've all seen too much on television before, when a building was deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down.
See what you see and not what you're supposed to see.